Welcome, everyone. This is Our Travel Experiences. I'm your host, Kyle Rasmussen, and today I have with me a badass adventurer, Erin. Erin, how are you today?
I'm doing great. That's a very kind introduction. Thank you, Kyle.
I was just looking at your Instagram here, and you got some crazy cool pictures on here of being out in the mountains and running and all of that. So I'm really excited to talk about your experiences today.
Yay. I always love talking about mountains, so I'm
Yeah,
excited.
yeah, awesome. Well, I'm curious just to kind of start it out. What's your background and where did this passion for adventuring in the outdoors begin?
Sure. Gosh, so I grew up in mid-Michigan where there is a distinct lack of mountains. There's really more cornfields and automobile plants than mountains, but my family didn't have a lot of money growing up, but somehow we always had a bike or, used cross-country skis from the church garage sale, what have you. So we always had a way to access the outdoors. And, in Michigan, there's always a lake nearby.
Hmm.
So spent a lot of time outside growing up. And I just loved riding my bike. That felt like freedom. And despite mostly running now, like being on a bike is still my primary love. Nothing feels like freedom like the wind in your hair on a bike. But
Yeah.
yeah. And then I moved to Arizona in, oh, geez, maybe 2003, 2004. And I lived in Tucson with the Santa Catalina Mountains.
Mhm.
Tucson is surrounded on all sides by mountain ranges. And I started hiking, but I realized I wanted to see more. If I only had a small window of time, I realized I needed to move faster. So I started trail running just so I could see more, get higher, chase down the ridge line that I saw.
Hmm.
And it was kind of on after that. I just love exploring the vertical world. I love doing it by the power of my own 2 feet. And it's especially great when I can do that with friends.
Yeah, that's awesome. And now you're up in Idaho, is that correct?
Yes, I moved to Coeur d'Alene. I had a brief 6 year stint in Texas and then moved to Coeur d'Alene in 2018.
Okay, very cool. Lots
Yeah.
of good mountains in Coeur d'Alene, that's for sure.
Oh, yeah, we got a couple.
Um, yeah, that's amazing. So you've just kind of always been outdoors. I think that's really cool. I know I really enjoyed that growing up as well. We were always up in the mountains, always outdoor doing things as a family, and
Nice.
I just have such an appreciation for the outdoors. Um, and now kind of combining running with that as well. So how I mean, you started doing the trail running, and now you're doing ultras up in the mountains. How did that come about?
I ask myself that all the time. So it's one of those things where like they're terrible and I would never necessarily recommend it to other people, yet
Yeah.
I keep signing up for them. So I think it was just, I remember, gosh, it was in 2014. I was having a weird day at work and I had heard about this little race called the Leadville 100.
Okay.
And there was a lottery for it. And I was like, I'm at work. I'm grumpy. I'm going to throw my name in this lottery just because it felt like some kind of forward motion at that time.
Hmm.
And, in my head, I did it. I was like, there's no way I'll ever get picked. So that was in December of 2014. I forgot about it. And then one random day in January, I checked my email and there was this email that said, congratulations, you have been selected for the 2015 Leadville 100. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I can cuss. I won't do it. But
You're
what I
totally.
said next was like, oh, shit. No. So the first ultra I ever officially registered for was a 100-mile race
Oh wow.
in Colorado. So,
Yeah, I've
and
heard of the Leadville 100 before. That
yeah,
was a very
yeah.
easy one.
No, no, it's not. And so I connected with a coach because I like I have no idea what I'm doing, and Um, again, living in Austin at the time, I'm like, how am I supposed to train for a race that takes place at roughly 10,000 feet when I live in Austin? So
Yeah.
um, I connected with a coach, Liza Howard. She's absolutely amazing, still coaching out of Texas if anyone is looking. And she helped me train. And, through that process, like the race was the goal, but the larger journey I was on, like I learned so much about myself and discipline and what's important, all kinds of running as life metaphors. And
Mhm.
so
Yeah,
yeah, it was a great experience. And with that race, ultimately I did not finish, also known as a DNF in the world of racing.
yeah.
It was 50 miles out, 50 miles back. So there was a cutoff at 9:45 p.m. at the 60-mile mark. I got there at 9:51.
Oh no.
So I missed it by 6 minutes. And, by now that was 7, almost 8 years ago. And I still think about all of the ways I could have shaved 6 minutes. And I do feel like I have unfinished business with that race, but, and I'll get back there eventually. But it was from there, it was like, I, I was hooked. It was one of those things where the day after it was terrible. And then I found myself browsing for more races. And then I did end up signing up for a 100-mile race in Texas, the Cactus Rose 100. That took place in October 2015, just a couple months later. And I
Mhm.
ended up placing fourth female in that one.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
What?
So that was my redemption race.
Yeah, was the DNF a motivator to pursue more ultras?
Absolutely. I'm a pretty competitive person, not necessarily with other folks, but with myself.
Mhm.
And like, I felt like I had all this training built up. I, got bit by the bug. And also the running community is just so fantastic. My experiences of
Yeah.
being in the running community have been really inclusive and just really warm and fuzzy all around. So
Mhm.
I'm like, I want more. I want to do this more.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's one thing I've noticed as I've gotten into those longer distance runs is how welcoming everyone is. I wasn't used to
Yeah.
that growing up playing, tennis and basketball and all these other sports.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
definitely competitiveness, but even though you're out there running, competing against all these people, especially doing ultras, everyone is so supportive and welcoming. It's such a
Oh,
cool
yeah.
sport. I haven't found that anywhere else. Um,
Totally agree.
so
And just
I'm curious.
the other thing I just want to recognize real quick are the volunteers at these races. Like,
Hmm.
it's mind blowing to me. Like the Cactus Rose race was a 25-mile loop. So there were strangers who were out there in the dark, in the rain, cheering us on while we literally ran in circles. So,
Yeah,
like, thank you, race volunteers everywhere.
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Before that Leadville 100, had you run a marathon before? Had you done anything?
No. Actually, to this day, I have still never ran a marathon.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
yeah, I've run 50 miles, 100 milers. I've ran a 200-mile race, but I've never actually ran the marathon distance as a race. So,
Oh my gosh. That's crazy. What how I'm curious, like how did you even, decide on a 100-mile race or like hear about that having not run a marathon?
I I was running trail, and if I'm sure a lot of folks may recall the book Born to Run, like so many people.
Mhm.
That book came out in what, 2008, 2009. And I remember thinking, like, what would it be like to run this long distance or to do this, distance in one go? And so I think I started, diving into trail running content back when Trail Runner magazine was still an actual magazine and things like that, and hearing about these races. And it was one of those things where like, oh, I'd like to try that someday. But,
Hmm.
it's as humans, it's so easy for us to, make up reasons of why someday isn't now. And then all it took, I guess, was one bad day at work for me to enter the lottery. So,
That's awesome. How many ultras have you done at this point?
I'm not sure. I think maybe about 10 to 12. Um,
Okay.
so relative to other folks in the world, it's not that many races, but I've also gotten more into just doing, choose your own adventure type of stuff. Um,
Mhm.
Especially since moving to the inland Northwest, it's harder for me to justify a race entry fee when I can, jump in my car, drive 4 hours to the west, and, you know, go through the enchantments in a day. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so I still love racing and I'm still intrigued by it. I was browsing Ultra Sign Up this morning, but there's just so much beautiful country surrounding us that I haven't been racing as much.
Mhm. Yeah, you can kind of easily go create your own ultra for yourself.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Uh, that's funny. Where has been your favorite spot or favorite race and kind of your favorite spot to adventure on your own?
Mm. My favorite race, I ran the Mount Baker Ultra in 2019, and that is put on by there's a guy out of Bellingham, Dan Probst, and this race actually took place in like the early, oh gosh, I want to say like 1911. I don't remember, but it was,
Wow.
they start at the time, they went from Bellingham up to Mount Baker, but with Dan's race, he starts in the town of Concrete, and then you run to, I think it's about 25-ish miles of Forest Service road and trail. And then you get to the base of Mount Baker and you switch to mountaineering packs. Then you actually have like 6 miles of glacier travel,
Oh gosh.
and it's an out and back. And so the turnaround point is the summit of Mount Baker. So you summit, then you do it all in reverse. You come down the glacier, then you swap back into your running gear, and then you run back into town. It was about 50, I think my Garmin tracked it as like 54 miles, over
Wow.
10,000 feet of elevation gain. Um, but that race was just so much fun. I loved the mix of skills where, I needed to switch my mindset of, okay, now I'm trail running. Okay, now I'm mountaineering. And turning around. And it was, that race was also a good lesson for me, because I had put a lot of pressure on myself, like as I was getting more into racing. Of I placed second at like 4 races prior to that, and it was becoming a thing in my head of like, oh no, what if you're not good enough? What if you never get first? What if blah 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 blah? All of this
Hmm.
not particularly helpful chatter in my head. And then in that race, I placed first female, and that year I was the only female to finish.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, and guess what changed about my life?
What's that?
Absolutely nothing. So it was like a good lesson of like, don't attach yourself to these external outcomes and
Hmm.
moving goalposts, because that none of that stuff. I mean, it was fun and it's neat, but none of it really matters. It's like you just got to
Yeah.
be good with yourself. So
Yeah. I love that. I think that's such a good kind of shift in mindset. It's just as long as you're improving yourself and feel good about what you're doing, who cares what place you actually get?
yeah, yeah, and that after that, I was able to relax a bit, but yeah, just that always like chasing bigger, higher, faster, more. And then really at the end of it, like, am I having fun? Like, am I
Yeah.
creating meaningful experiences? Am I meeting other people? Like, that's the stuff that really matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I know, especially when it comes to the longer distance runs, usually like, mile 18 or so, I'm like, why am I doing this again? Is exactly
Yeah.
what I want to be doing right now. But, you finish that race and you just feel amazing. Like,
Oh yeah.
such a sense of accomplishment. And I love, especially with running, you know, you you're finding where your limits are and how far you can actually go.
Yes.
I think it's a good kind of like forcing you to push so far out of your comfort zone that you have to grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. I always feel like I don't know that running or, pushing, I don't think it creates anything new, but I do think it can turn up the volume on the qualities that are already inside of you.
Hmm.
That's what I like about it. And just like knowing that it's there and tapping into it. And when you get into that place of flow and everything clicks, or in the alternative, when everything is falling apart and you get to
Yeah.
see how you react to that. Yeah. So many good lessons in it though.
Definitely. I think it's such a good mental trainer, so to
Oh,
speak.
100%. Yes. Yeah.
I was just yesterday listening to Cameron Haynes, his book about his kind of life story and running ultras and stuff like that. He
Yeah.
was talking about how he ran the Bighorn 100 in Wyoming, which sounds
Yes.
absolutely awful.
Yes.
uh, but yeah, he was just talking about how he kept trying, like, was doing everything he could not to quit because it was just such a brutal race, and he was missing all of his goals that he had set for himself, but he persevered and made it through.
Hmm.
I think it's just amazing, and I love, again, you're pushing past your limits. I think that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And just seeing like, how do I show up in this race and how does
Hmm.
that translate to how I show up in other areas of my life?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm gonna guess, after doing 100-mile race, everything else in life is probably a little bit easier.
Yeah. In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. So, like you mentioned a moment ago, whenever I have that, I'm doing something that I don't necessarily want to do, I can tell myself like, oh, this is mental training. This will make me tougher for when the going is not so great.
Hmm.
Um, and and in other ways, though, like it sometimes I have a hard time returning to the real world, so to speak, after a race or after a big adventure. And I imagine, like with anyone traveling, if you've ever traveled and had a really meaningful trip, and then you come home and like, it's weird to come back to reality because you've just lived and existed in a space that is very intentional and you're accomplishing this goal and then you come back, and so sometimes that transition space is challenging.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it's all been so formative, and I'm just so grateful for all of the experiences that I've had. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's really nice to sleep in a bed at night too. That's another thing.
yeah, yeah. What's that like? Um, running in the dark in the middle of the night for long periods of time.
Oh, it's definitely, I get that tunnel vision where um yeah, you're running with a headlamp, and in my experiences, sometimes if the headlamp isn't adjusted properly, it's bouncing. So you
Hmm.
have this 5 foot tunnel of bouncing light that you're just kind of following. And um, I like it though. Like also in my experiences of mountaineering, where you have the alpine star, which means you get out of your tent at 12:30, 1 a.m. and you take off. Um, it really does. I mean, it narrows your focus, and you have one job, and it's to move forward one step at a time, illuminated by your path. Um, so far, I've never had anything like hallucinations or anything while running. I have some friends who have, but I almost find it peaceful because the
Hmm.
focus is so narrow. Like the bouncing light gets tired. there's a peace to it, or a simplicity of you're just moving forward in this tunnel.
Hmm. Yeah, probably it's just you out there by yourself. So
Yeah.
I'm sure it's probably really reflective as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And the biggest thing though is don't spend too much time looking around, because if you
Ah,
happen to catch the glowing eyes of some kind of animal, then that's scary.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure that's a good motivator to run faster. You don't know what's out there chasing
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly.
you. Do you do any other mountainous activities like rock climbing or things like that?
I do. I'm a perpetual motion machine. I started skiing with a mixed success this past year. um, yeah, so I like to ski. I like to rock climb, ice climb. I'm going to the Bozeman Ice Festival in December, to take some clinics and just be immersed in that for a little bit. Um, what else? Yeah, riding my bike. I love being in motion, and I think movement is such an important thing for me.
Hmm.
So yeah, and I just bought some cross country skis, so we'll see how that
Oh,
goes.
cool.
And yeah,
I've
I
always
just
wanted to try out that sport.
nice. Yeah, let's do it. You can rent them. We'll go.
Yeah, I'm up for that.
Nice.
I feel like, if you're crazy enough to go run 100 miles, you're probably crazy enough to do cross country skiing too.
It's true. Yeah.
That one looks like a hard sport as well. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, what's it like, in terms of traveling to, some of these remote areas to do these runs, to rock climb, to ski, to all those things. Um, what does your planning and your process look like to make sure that you can get where you need to go when you need to be there?
Um, that is a great question. I'm not always the greatest planner. So I do a lot of my runs just by like what calls to me.
Hmm.
I'll look at a map and I'll see, and I still love maps, like an actual physical map. I've got a bunch of Forest Service maps of all of the surrounding areas, and just looking at the contour lines, like is there a ridge line that captures my attention, and how do I get there? uh, a lot of times I'll sleep in my car. um, I live in the Northwest, so obviously I have a Subaru.
Yeah.
So, but I've got a Forester, and I'm, you know, pretty compact. I'm 5'2", so I can sleep in the back comfortably. And
I'm jealous.
but I'll, well, you can probably reach things that are, up high in cupboards, so it all evens out. But yeah, I'll drive to a trailhead. I'll sleep there, wake up early, um, and then just go execute. Like going into it, there's always this might be a little, um, I don't know, not to get like dark about it, but a lot of the things I do, there is also an inherent risk of injury or even death. I went to the Seven Devils Mountains in September, down in Hell's Canyon, and there was a line that had, or a traverse that had caught my attention, from the fastest known time website. And I'm like, I'm going to give this a go. And it was a really, like, the rock out there was just so terrible and chossy. And as I was kind of scrambling my way through, like, chunks of rock would break off in my hand.
Oh God.
So there was, this moment of, I could really injure myself, or, if I take a bad fall, there is no one out here.
Hmm.
I do a lot of the things that I do by myself. Uh,
Wow.
in my demographic, there's not a lot of people who can just take off and disappear into the mountains for a couple days. So
Mhm.
people have these things like families and children, and yeah. So
Ridiculous.
so for me, yeah, I can just go. And um, but I do, yeah, I do a lot of it alone. So I do have a Garmin InReach, which is a device that can be activated for SOS, or I can send my tracking link to other people, and then
Mhm.
they can watch how my day unfolds. And if my dot stops moving, they can, let someone know. Um, but a lot of it, the planning and the preparation, is what catches my attention. And then I'm willing to drive pretty far to see what the country looks like. Also in September, I went up to Kananaskis country, which is outside of Canmore in Alberta. Because again, there
Okay.
was a ridge line that I thought it was pretty, but it was like a 7-hour drive. Um, so I'm willing to drive 14 hours round trip to see a pretty ridge line.
Hmm.
It sounds ridiculous saying it out loud, but like that's what fills my cup, is just getting out there and exploring and seeing the rock and hearing it crunch under my feet. What does it feel like? What does it look like? Just that whole sensory experience.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm honestly the same way. I'm like, I will travel to the other corner of the earth just to see something for a minute,
Yep.
and be able to say that I saw it.
Yeah.
Um, I think those moments of where you're standing on that ridge line and you're just seeing everything around you, like that moment is worth it.
Oh, absolutely. That's when I feel most alive, and that's when I feel like the truest version of myself.
Hmm. Yeah. What I guess what have been some of the craziest or craziest feats that you've achieved or things that you're most proud of achieving
Oh man.
in terms of, being in the mountains and running and
Yeah.
that thing?
I think one of the most meaningful trips that I've done was last summer. I took a week at the end of July and drove into Washington, and just kind of went on a volcano tour. And like I lived out of my car for a week. By the time I got back home, it smelled like beef jerky and dirty socks, but I was so happy. so, but yeah, I started off the week. I drove over to Mount St. Helens and went up and down Mount St. Helens on a Wednesday, then drove over to Mount Adams. I did Mount Adams in a single push on Friday, then drove to Glacier Peak, which that glacier is the most remote of the 5 Washington volcanoes.
Mhm.
And I mean, this probably tells you a little bit about my personality, but I saved the hardest one for last. And Glacier Peak has has a 17-mile approach through wilderness, and it's like 35 miles round trip with, again, like over 10,000 feet of gain. And I did that in a single push. It took me 15 hours round trip.
Oh boy.
And that's usually something that, folks will do in like a 3-day trip. Um, and Glacier Peak, I mean, I was definitely tired by that point. And it was, it was just a fantastic week of just traveling and listening to myself and taking things at my own pace. Coming down Glacier, it got a little spicy. So I was coming down from the peak and coming across a glacier, which I will fully acknowledge, a solo person traveling on a glacier is likely unnecessarily risky.
Yeah, probably
Um,
not a great idea.
no, yeah, but it was a choice that I took, and when I was coming down, the snow had softened, so by then the sun had hit it. So I stepped down, I blew out a step, um, and I wasn't able to arrest myself. And so I slid uncontrolled for about 200 feet, and narrowly missed going into a moat, which the moat is like there's that space between the rock, because the rock will warm by the sun and then kind of melt snow away. So there's a gap between where the glacier ends and where a rock begins.
Mhm.
So I came really close to sliding into a moat and likely disappearing forever. So that was
Gosh.
probably, that was terrifying. And I said a lot of bad words when I finally stopped sliding. Um, and again, this is do not try this at home. Learn from my decisions, make good choices. But for me that day, I wanted to go fast and light, so I did not have crampons. I did not have an ice axe, and so I learned from that. And I don't think I'd ever go on a glacier without an ice axe and crampons again.
You learned the hard way there.
Oh yeah, I like to learn lessons the hard way, just to really reinforce them, I
Yeah.
guess. I
That's
do the
funny.
hard work for other people. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Um, yeah, that's, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine that feeling. Um, I remember talking with Amanda, who we met through.
Yeah.
She was telling me of all these crazy stories. I think some of them were with you, and I'm like, I don't know if I'd actually want to go on an adventure with you because there's a good chance my heart's gonna start pumping a little bit faster than I wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's go.
Yeah. Has there been any other kind of harrowing experiences like that for you?
Um, yeah, there's even locally, I think that's the I had a just out on Micah Peak, so out of Liberty Lake, if you're in the
Hmm.
Spokane area. Um, I guess this was in 2019. I just wanted to go up and down Micah Peak on a Sunday afternoon. It's about 14 miles round trip. And as I was approaching the peak, there were these two, maybe 13, 14-year-old boys who, like, I hadn't seen anyone at all that day. And right near the peak, these two young mountain bikers came riding their bikes toward me, just screaming and shouting. And, my brain was in like peaceful, I'm on a run mode. So to see
Hmm.
these two teenage boys like shouting towards me, I was like, what is happening? But there was another mountain biker, uh, older gentleman who was out riding that they found down. And despite having all of the cell towers on Micah Peak, there's weird pockets where there's no cell service. And so they had tried calling 911 and they couldn't get through. And I happened to have my Garmin InReach with me. This isn't an advertisement, but it's a good idea to have one if you're going to be
Yeah.
doing a lot of adventures. But so I hit the SOS button and then ran ahead, and it just looked like this gentleman had been riding his bike and then kind of fell over. So being involved in like activating SOS, having first responders come on scene, they initiated CPR, the helicopter came out, the whole 9 yards. So that was a really interesting thing where, I was just out for a casual Sunday afternoon run, and then it turned into a rescue mission.
Jeez.
And then and that was, just here local outside of Liberty Lake. So, even though I was within a stone's throw of a town,
Hmm.
it can become a wilderness context pretty quickly when you don't have
Yeah.
cell service or when there's no one else around. And I remember I got so frustrated because I was talking with the rescuers and they kept asking me like, what are the nearest streets? Like, tell me the nearest cross streets. And I'm like, I'm on a mountain. Like, I don't have streets. I'm on a trail. Like, I don't know how to describe this to you other than my GPS coordinates, which is going to be far more accurate than any streets.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
They just kept asking, like, what are the cross streets? I'm like, there are none.
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. You never know what's going to happen. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like it's always good to be prepared there.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, with going out adventuring, especially on your own, um, what do you recommend people take with them? If maybe they don't have a Garmin InReach or something like that. What kind of stuff should you have with you if you're going on a trail run, out there in the middle of nowhere, or going out mountaineering by yourself?
Yeah. Snacks.
Snacks.
Yeah.
That is
I
important.
mean, beyond that though, I subscribe to the well, with the exception of Glacier Peak, but the better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it sort of
Mhm.
mentality. So I will, there's 10 essentials. Usually you can find it online because I can't remember all 10 in the moment, but I don't bring those all of the time. But like for a trail run, like definitely bring a jacket. Weather can change quickly in the mountains. And never forget that you are in mountains, even if it is just, Micah Peak or Mount Spokane. Mountains are mountains. They create their own weather and it can change
Mhm.
quickly. So bringing layers. If you're going out for long distance, bring a water filter. Um, I like to carry a lighter because I figure, if something goes really sideways, maybe I can at least create a fire or use it for signaling. And a cheap plastic Bic lighter really isn't going to add much weight to your pack at
Yeah.
all. Um, I do like carrying those little, again, they're like the little flimsy mylar blankets. Like those are super
Mm.
helpful. Especially you can generate a lot of heat wrapping one of those around you. And again, that's maybe a couple ounces. Um, so just some basic safety things. Tell someone where you're going and your approximate return time. Like if I'm going on a big run, I'll usually tell a friend, this should probably take me between, 6 and 8 hours. If you don't hear from me by 12 hours, something's gone very wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like the estimated time. There's the my day has taken a turn, but I'm still okay time. And then there's the this is not good time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the one that I'm not good about. I like disappearing for a while, but I should
Oh
probably tell
yeah, it's the
what I'm
best.
doing.
Yeah.
Um, but so you have your business Updraft Counseling, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, cool. So tell me about that. How did that start?
Sure. Well, it started as I mentioned earlier, I decided that 2022 was the year I was going to learn how to ski. And it was going really well right up until the point where it wasn't. So um, in February, I got into a skiing accident. I got going too fast. I couldn't control my speed. I, caught an edge and I ended up tearing my left MCL and left ACL,
Oh,
which was absolutely devastating. Like as a person who like movement is a critical component of my life and to suddenly be unable to do that was pretty horrible. And and it was also I'm a human. I've gone through some things and so movement is also a large part of how I cope with the ups and downs of life. And at times, I've probably used it as an avoidance mechanism too. So to
mm.
suddenly not have movement in my life and to have to just sit with all of my feelings, gross,
Sounds
yuck.
terrible.
It's terrible. Yeah. So, and I say this as a licensed clinical social worker, feelings, whoa. And it was probably the worst and the best thing that's ever happened to me because um, I decided to reach out for some support and connect with a therapist. And I talked to two different people who were good people, but neither one of them seemed to understand the importance of movement in my life. I felt that it was seen more as a hobby or something I did on the weekends rather than like I have built my life around this. and
Hmm.
um, and I was looking around like who someone needs to work with folks who have been injured and someone needs to understand the importance of like mountains and vertical pursuit and movement and hiking and all of these things. Like someone should really have a counseling business that, you know, looks at people who work and play in these wild spaces. Why is no one doing this? Someone needs to do this. And then I was like, oh, oh, how about me? Yeah. So it was like, sometimes when you see a gap and you're looking around, like, who's going to fill it? And then you realize, okay, I guess I'll step into it. Um, so that's what inspired my business. And I've been in social work forever. I've been in social services for 18 years at this point. I graduated with my master's of social work in 2010. And so having a private practice is something that I had thought about previously, but it was always kind of one of those like, again, like someday, or maybe now is not the right time, or fill in the blank excuse. Again,
Hmm.
as humans sometimes do when
Yeah.
there's something like big and scary and you don't want to fail, so you just don't do it. You can't fail if you never start, right? So
Hmm. Yeah.
um so I thought about it more and more, and it just felt right. Like in my bones, in my gut, it just spoke to me. And so I decided to do it. And I remember I had my injury in February, and I think I filed for the business in like the end of March, like started going through the process in Idaho. Um and I remember opening my business banking account in May and getting my debit card that had my business name on it. And it just felt so cool to look at this debit card and see that I had brought something to life.
Hmm.
um, and so my focus is people who, work and play in wild spaces. And certainly you don't have to identify as an athlete or, a mountain sport person. But if there are folks who feel like that is important for a clinician to understand, I can speak the language of, adventure and mountains and all of that, and also have the clinical piece to it. Um, and I also started it too because, while I've just spent nearly 45 minutes talking about how much I love mountains, but they are an indifferent host, and things can happen. Trauma and loss does occur in mountains. And
Hmm.
um, I, at this point in my life, having been in climbing communities and mountaineering communities, I have lost friends in the mountains, and I know people who have lost very dearly loved folks in the mountains. And so, how do we reconcile and how do we explore that space of when we're doing this thing that we love, but there's also the risk, and there's real consequence. And so, also creating a space for that. Like even in my own experience, so I had this horrible injury that changed my life in good and bad ways. And then a lot of folks were asking me like, "Oh, are you going to ski this season? Are you going to ski this season?" And I was like, "Oh no, oh no, oh no." And yet a week ago, I was out at 49 degrees north on opening weekend
Oh my
with a
gosh.
friend. Um, my friend Taylor, bless her heart, she was very patient with me, but I went out skiing again. And there were many people who did not understand why I would want to do that again. And
Hmm.
I know it doesn't make sense to everyone, but it calls to me. So if there are other people who are trying to reconcile, how is it that, this sport or this thing that I love that has had real consequences, and yet I still pursue it. Um, I can hold space for that.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's amazing. Especially if you lose someone or have a serious injury out there, I'm sure it can be hard to get back out there. You're gonna hesitate maybe a little bit to do that. So that's really cool that you're helping people through that and get them back out to what they actually love doing.
Yeah, and like they're not weird. It's not a death wish. It's not a why are it's like I get it. I of course they are the expert of their own experience, but I can
Mhm.
understand and I can walk beside folks who are navigating that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Have you through your business, has there been some successes that you can point to so far?
I That's a tough one. I think I've talked with so many wonderful people. Like that's just the part of why I love social work and love what I do is even though I consider myself an introvert, like lots of people overwhelm me, but one-on-one talking with someone, like we hold so many amazing stories, so many amazing experiences, like good and bad and tragic and horrible and beautiful. And it's an honor for me to sit down with someone and to have them trust me to share
Hmm.
their story and their experience with them. Um, and I always, it always makes me so happy when, um, I talk with a client and we talk about a strategy. And when they come back to the next session and they say, oh, I tried, X, Y, and Z, and it worked. And it's like, oh, that's great. Like,
Yeah.
that is so cool. And like, it's also an honor just to witness other people as they are, navigating this hairy thing called life and,
Hmm.
getting to, again, bearing witness to their stories and their experience and their pain and their joy. It's an absolute honor.
Yeah, I'm sure that's got to be rewarding too when you hear that from them. They've made progress.
Yeah.
Um, that's really cool. Well, is there any big adventures that you have planned coming up?
Oh boy. Very excited about the ice festival in December, going to Highlight Canyon and ice climbing there. For next year, I've got some tentative things. I'm talking with a friend about the Sierra High Route um, in, as the name suggests, through the Sierras in
Yeah.
California. Um, my friend Sally is an amazing hiker, and she's got some great through hiking experience under her belt. And so we're talking about that. Um, there's also something that I really want to do called the Rainier Infinity Loop, um, which combines, running and mountaineering. There's a trail that goes around Mount Rainier, the Wonderland Trail. So the Infinity Loop is the idea of you would summit, go up and over Mount Rainier, run half of the Wonderland Trail, go up and over Mount Rainier again,
Oh
and
my God.
then run it in the opposite direction. So again, kind of making an infinity loop. So that
Mhm.
it was double summits of Mount Rainier with over 100 miles of running. Um, I want to do it so badly. As you can imagine, I'm having trouble recruiting another person.
I can't imagine
Yeah,
why.
yeah. I'm like, hey, do you want to give up a week of your life to do this
Yeah.
really hard thing that's probably going to involve terrible weather and sleep deprivation? So,
You know what
I'm,
the funny thing is, I'm like, that sounds like a really fun challenge.
yeah, yeah. I think I would love to complete it with another woman because, like, for fastest known time, I think the last female team to complete it was in either 2019 or 2020, and they ran into some bad weather, so it added some time. Like if one could find the perfect weather window, it would be so much fun. But that's, just to try it. I don't, setting the fastest known time would be cool, but I just think having that experience with another person,
Mhm.
I mean, the stories you would come away with. And so
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm like shamelessly courting a few friends to see if I can convince them to do it with me. So yeah, but no bites yet.
What is the fastest time right now for that?
I haven't looked at it lately, but I think it was around 5 days. Um,
Okay.
and again, that was part of it was the team. The two badass women who did it, they ran into some weather. Like they got all the way up to Camp Muir, which is like 10,000
Okay.
feet for the second time, and then had to turn around.
Oh no.
And then I think they had to like wait it out in their van for a while, and then they went up again. So they essentially almost completed 3 summits of Rainier.
Jeez. One is hard enough, let alone three times.
Yeah. So tremendous amount of respect for them. But I think it'd be so much fun to try it. That terrible fun.
Hmm. Yeah. I love that mindset of just like, this sounds terrible, but let's see what we can do. And
Yeah.
those are the kind of people that I like to be around and talk to. You're pushing yourself and seeing
Yeah.
what's possible out there.
Yeah.
I think it's really amazing. So I appreciate you sharing. And if there is any other crazy adventures that you need help on, let me know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
Sounds good.
well, Erin, any other crazy stories you want to share, or anything else that you want to share with the listeners before we hop off here?
If you are interested or intrigued, this will just be a shameless plug for the Spokane Mountaineers here. A lot of the wonderful people that I have connected with here in the Inland Northwest have been through the Spokane Mountaineers. I
Okay.
took a mountaineering course through them in 2019, and in full disclosure, I'm now co-directing the mountaineering course.
Oh, wow.
But they also have courses on rock climbing, ice climbing, backpacking, all kinds of things. But if you find yourself intrigued and want to explore mountain adventures, Spokane Mountaineers is a good place to start out.
Okay. Is there an
Yeah.
Instagram or website or something for that?
Yeah, I think it's just Spokane Mountaineers on social media and the website as well.
Okay.
But I've met a lot of wonderful people through that organization, and they're also involved in conservation efforts in the Inland Northwest. Just do a lot of good things for the outdoor adventure community.
Yeah, that's awesome. And where can people find you?
My personal Instagram it's just my full name, Erin Lynn Good, and my business Instagram is Updraft Counseling.
Okay. And I think the
Yeah.
website is the same, right?
Yep.
Updraftcounseling.com.
Yep. Updraftcounseling.com. Yep. I'm a big
Perfect.
cloud enthusiast, so yeah.
Yeah, I got the website up here too. I love the pictures on here, and very easy
Oh,
to navigate and see everything that you offer too. So
oh, nice. Thanks. Yeah.
good. Well, awesome, Erin. Thank you so much for your time and sharing your experiences. I know I really enjoyed the conversation, and now I'm really motivated to go look into some more ultras and some crazy adventures on the mountains after
Yes.
talking with you.
Yeah. Well, let me know when you want to go. I'll bring a pizza. So
Oh, there we go. I'm in.
pizza is the perfect trail snack.
Yeah. Add some whiskey with that, and I'm 100% there.
All right. Cool.
Uh, all right. Well, thanks again, Erin, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere around the world soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Kyle.
Yep. Have a good one.
Me too.
Bye. Hey everybody, Kyle here. If you enjoyed today's show and want more, you can always check out every episode on Spotify, Anchor, YouTube, and now Amazon Music as well. Just search for Our Travel Experiences on any of those platforms and it will pop up. You can also find everything all in one place on my website, ourtravelexp.com. And if you want to see my travel pictures as well as travel pictures from guests on the show, you can check them out on Instagram. The page is called Our Travel Experiences Podcast. And if you want to share your own pictures on the Instagram page or be a guest on the podcast, you can message me via that Instagram page or email me at ourtravelexperiences@outlook.com. I would love to see your pictures and hear about your travel experiences, so please send them my way. And if that isn't enough for you, make sure to check out my weekly YouTube show, From Around the World Fridays. Every Friday, I'm taking 5 to 10 minutes to answer questions from listeners, share some souvenirs that I bought over the years, share my postcards over the years that I've accumulated, or share videos and pictures from one particular city or country that I visited, and so much more. So check it out, guys. You won't be disappointed. And make sure you go subscribe to that as well. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you somewhere around the world soon.